Ladies and gentlemen, I am the American Spy Fox. Welcome back to the channel. It has been 3 weeks since I've uploaded anything. I apologize. What my nerd friend told me is the power modulator. I don't know. I hired a nerd to do nerd stuff. He fixed my computer. It wouldn't even turn on. Now it does. One more thing about the creepy, weird intro. I've been practicing editing with this horror pack from the editing software I use because I've been working on a really big analysis. You could call it a synthesis, analysis, whatever you want to call it, video about the universe of Silent Hill. It's one of the biggest undertakings I've ever taken on this channel, of course, besides the Nirvana series. There are dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of fantastic analytical videos out there about the world, the universe of Silent Hill, and I wanted to make the most in-depth, detailed one there is, the definitive version for the internet. If you know anything about Silent Hill, fans of Silent Hill are hardcore. That's a very bold statement. That's a very big task. I had a lot of work stored on this computer. Thank God I could get back into it. You might not think that you would like a video on the American Spy Fox channel about Silent Hill, but that's probably because you don't know about Silent Hill. When it comes out, give it a chance. Anything you can imagine, any morbid, deprived, atrocious topic you can think of is covered in the universe of Silent Hill, including, things that we don't like to talk about are revealed when you go to Silent Hill, right? This was a project that when I first started, I thought, this will take me maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah, okay. When it comes out, it comes out. It's probably going to take a couple more months, but it will be the biggest, most detailed video on Silent Hill on the internet. I promise you that. One other tiny thing before we get started. If you are an internet sleuth, much like me, you spend a lot of time online researching, contacting people, talking to people that you may not know. You may want to be using a VPN, and I suggest NordVPN. If you want to conceal your IP address, you want to take advantage of being able to disguise where you are or pretend like you're in Africa or Australia so you can watch different movies on Netflix. There's all kinds of advantages to using NordVPN. My links will be below. Anytime you use my links to become a subscriber of NordVPN, you're not only helping yourself out, you're also helping me. Further information on NordVPN will be in the next big video. I will fill you in on up to date on all their features and everything they can offer you. Mainly, it just protects you. It's as simple as that. Use a VPN. It runs in the background. You don't even know it's there, and nobody can get your information. The Story of Nirvana by Michael Azerrad. Chapter 12, page 265. Courtney originally did the Vanity Fair story believing that it would be a mostly flattering piece on her and her music. She was overlooking the fact that her band had only released one extremely modestly selling independent label album a year before, a point of little import to Vanity Fair's upscale readership. Exactly. They're only interviewing you because you are Kurt Cobain's wife. You have done nothing in your life to this point that would get the attention of Vanity Fair. All they're looking for is dirt, and she gave it to them. She gave it all to them. She is the direct result of Frances Bean being taken by the Children's Services, as you will learn in this chapter. This bit of hubris blinded her to the fact that the article was being done by Lynn Hirschberg, well known for her unflattering celebrity profiles. Courtney thought the article would put her on the map. It did. By the way, this chapter is labeled "All We Did Is Cry." And I think, or all we did was cry. And I'm sure she was crying once her little ego was broken and she realized, nobody likes me at all. They're just trying to make fun of me because I'm such a fucking train wreck. She was used to an adoring UK music press that understood her sardonic, sarcastic sense of humor. Didn't ask hard questions, didn't do much investigation, and kept secrets in exchange for a favor of a hip musician. Lynn Hirschberg had no such allegiances. In other words, Lynn will tell the truth. Courtney says the story was arranged when she was still using. Had I not done drugs, I would have been lucid enough to see that Vanity Fair was going to stitch me up. What else were they going to do with me? Adding that she thought that a hostile article in the conservative Vanity Fair would probably translate into a study in outlaw cool to the rock community. Oh my God. She's always thinking about image. That's what I don't like about Courtney Love is everything is image to her. There's nothing authentic. She's just always thinking, what would people like? What would the most people like? That's what I'll be. I do have a video, if you've never watched it, if you're new to the channel, a video all about Vanity Fair and how they covered up Jeffrey Epstein's many perverse offenses. And they wrote an article making him out to be this great, eccentric genius billionaire when they knew that he was actually a pedo. So that's a video that got about 1 million views on this channel. If you've never watched it, that's one of the few that I'm very proud of for writing. Vanity Fair, like many other publications, not good people. Sometimes they do good things. Most of the time, they're just covering bullshit up. It depends on who you know and who you blow, right? The article appeared in the September 92 issue. One of the many controversial aspects of the piece was a photo of quite pregnant Courtney naked from the waist down in a bit of see-through lingerie. No big deal. But it turned out she had been smoking a cigarette in the photograph and that editor Tina Brown had ordered it airbrushed out. Courtney says they had done a marathon photo session for the piece, going through dozens of rolls of film and several costume and set changes. At one point, in the middle of changing costumes, she says she just happened to have a puff on a cigarette. And photographer Mikel Comte, sorry, can't pronounce his name, just happened to be right there to capture it. She is, however, smoking in at least one other picture in the session. I mean, look at the cigarette. You can see that it's about a quarter of the way smoked. That's not a puff. After the article appeared, magazines all over the world were clamoring for the unairbrushed photo. Courtney claims she and Kurt bought the pictures back for $50,000, a price she calls blackmail. And yeah, it was blackmail. But who would be stupid enough to be 8 months pregnant and go to a photo session, light up a fucking cigarette for a magazine that sells thousands of copies around the world? But that was the least of it. The piece described Courtney as a train wreck personality who isn't particularly interested in the consequences of her actions. It strongly hinted that she had introduced Kurt to heroin, although that was not the case. Hirschberg quoted various unnamed industry insiders who fear for the health of the child, without mentioning whether these industry insiders had done any studies in teratogenetic medicine. Well, we all know that it's not good to smoke, and it's definitely not good to be using any kinds of drugs while another human being is growing inside of you. But far more damaging was one quote in the piece. After a description of how she and Kurt went to Alphabet City to score during the Saturday Night Live visit, Courtney added, "After that, I did heroin for a couple of months," which meant that she had done heroin long after she knew she was pregnant. Courtney vigorously protested that she had been misquoted. Hirschberg maintained that she had the tapes. And she probably did, because they don't want to be sued by the most popular rock star on earth, right? They had the tapes. She said it. Every single thing that ever tore down what little bit of mental stability Kurt Cobain had in his life was torn down by Courtney. All the privacy that was infiltrated, Courtney gave it to the media. That's why everybody knew that Courtney was Kurt's worst enemy. He just didn't know it at the time. It's like she wants you to know all of her dirty secrets. She thinks it's a game. Although the article seems to conclusively paint Courtney as a conniver, various factual errors throughout the piece would seem to compromise Hirschberg's accuracy. For instance, she wrote that Danny Goldberg was a vice president at Polygram Records when in fact he was a vice president of Atlantic. The piece also claimed that Goldberg was Nirvana's manager, but he actually had few managerial chores at Gold Mountain. That's interesting, because a few years ago he wrote a book claiming to be Nirvana's manager. But this is Michael Azerrad just doing Kurt a favor, trying to poke holes in Hirschberg's story, so Courtney will feel better about herself, right? He wasn't interviewing Danny Goldberg. Lynn, she wasn't interviewing Danny Goldberg. She was not researching Danny Goldberg. He's just a side note in the story. So if she gets a couple minor details wrong, it's no big deal. He's not the subject of her article. And it says that Danny Goldberg is now merely a consultant. Now, John Silva was Nirvana's manager as well. Danny would use John because John was younger and he understood the young music scene, the burgeoning music scene, right? Danny was like Bonnie Riot, like Fleetwood Mac era. So it would be natural to get a younger guy to tell you what's what. However, to this day, he still claims to be their manager. He's the guy who calls the shots. Hirschberg maintained that Kurt and Courtney first met 8 or so years ago, which would have put Kurt in high school. Oh, wow, I actually argued this in a video when I proved that they didn't meet until after Nevermind dropped. The piece perpetuated the gold digger theory by saying that the next time Courtney met Kurt after their first meeting in Portland, Kurt was a star, which was not true. Hirschberg also misreported an easily verified story about the bidding war over Hole. Most unfortunately, the piece also seemed to completely miss Courtney's sardonic sense of humor. This is a woman who, in the course of a delicate conversation about the whole, was she or wasn't she controversy, can come out with a deliberately sarcastic line like, if there is ever a time that a person should be on drugs, it's when they're pregnant. Because it sucks. Without considering how it would look in print. Spend even a little quality time with Courtney, and it's clear that an exchange she had with Kurt about firing Dave was purely facetious. Courtney claims to know how to manipulate the press so well, you would think that she wouldn't be stupid enough to use sarcastic comments under such serious scrutiny, right? I swear the whole legend about her being really smart, it's just that, a legend. She's actually quite stupid. And believe me when I say I had a lot of conversations with her father. I knew where she gets her sociopathic, manipulative behavior from. He always thought he was the smartest person in the room. He passed it to her. It's like, have you ever encountered somebody who is trying to manipulate you and they're too stupid to see that they're trying to manipulate you? Like they actually think they're getting over on you and they're smarter than you, but you know how dumb they are? That's Courtney Love. I also wanted to add, if you see any videos on YouTube, Facebook, wherever, talking about all these bogus stories about Kurt and Courtney poured beer on each other, they wrestled on the floor, Courtney punched Kurt, they met in Portland. No. Jennifer Finch definitively in the book Everybody Loves Our Town definitively told us the exact moment in time when she formally introduced Courtney Love to Kurt Cobain. It was late October at the Chicago Metro concert. That's when they met, 1991, which was a month after Nevermind dropped. Yes, they did not meet until after he was becoming famous. If Nevermind was a success, because the problem is there's a lot of YouTube channels who haven't come across certain information and they take Courtney's stories and they make videos out of it and then it appears to be the truth. So please correct those people. Say, no, you need to read this book or hell, watch my video on it. Like, they didn't meet until late 91, guys. If Nevermind was a success because the band was in the right place at the right time, the Vanity Fair piece found the Cobains at the wrong place at the wrong time. Besides the nation's continuing drug hysteria and a misguided Republican crusade for family values, the story also tapped into America's sudden guilt about what it had done to its children over the past decade. Suddenly, the U.S. media became fixated on child abuse stories, from the kids who were left home alone while their parents vacationed in Mexico to the poor little Long Island girl who was shackled for days in an underground bunker. A mom who had allegedly done heroin, not to mention smoked cigarettes, while pregnant, pressed some powerful buttons. That is terrible. I have heard stories about people who become foster parents and then they just lock the kids up in a room and, toss some food in. It's disgusting. Even Kurt wrote a song, the song Paper Cuts is all about these children who were abused in Aberdeen. One of them, he actually knew. One of the kids, their parents would lock them up in a room and just throw food in. They would poop on newspaper. It was just horrible, atrocious stories, man. I hate people like that. I think people who abuse children like that should be given life in prison, maybe even capital punishment, if I'm being quite honest. I wouldn't have thought that it. Imagine if they would treat a child that way. How would they treat a dog? You know? Wow. I wouldn't have thought that I could be dwarfed or squashed or arred or incredibly hurt by a story in that magazine, Courtney says, but the power of it was so intense. Notice how she uses the R word so easily. Someone writing a story about me is equivalent to being essayed. I'm pretty sure that any woman, or man for that matter, who's ever been R'd would rather have a bad story written about them than to go through what they went through. Like, my God, she's always the victim. She gives the ammunition, she gives all the dirt to the publications, then she plays the victim role, right? And people just don't feel sorry for her because fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. It was unbelievable. I read a fax of it and my bones shook. I knew that my world was over. I was dead. That was it. The rest of my life. Not only was I going to walk around with a big black mark, but any happiness that I had known, I was going to have to fight for the rest of my life. Oh my God, this woman is so dramatic. Had I not taken drugs in the first place, I would have been lucid enough to know what she was about. If somebody's going to write about you and they ask you to participate, you should study them and see what they've done in the past, right? The funny part is, if you watch Courtney Love's own documentary, it was either a Spin documentary or VH1, Janet Billig, her manager, her human sponge that would soak up all of her BS, said, we all warned her about Lynn Hirschberg. We all told her not to do the article. And here she is in Michael Azarad's book acting like she was totally naive and gullible and nobody knew what Lynn was all about. Like, this woman never checks with her friends. Like, hey, I'm going to lie to this guy. Could you help me with that lie? You know what I mean? Like, she will say things and then people directly in her circle will be like, no, we told her not to do that. She did it anyway. Better than having somebody write about you who's never even got your side of the story. I mean, she had a chance to tell her side of the story and she decided to smoke cigarettes while 8 months pregnant and talk about doing heroin. I don't feel sorry for her. I wouldn't have been candid. I would have figured out where I fit in the scheme of the Vanity Fair world. So what are you saying? You want to let all your dirt out? You wanted to tell her all your dirty secrets, but you didn't think she was going to write about it? That makes no sense. Why would the writer not write about what you're telling them? Courtney likes to think the story was some kind of setup, perhaps commandeered by Vanity Fair darling Madonna, whose new record label, Maverick, she had recently spurned, and loudly. I really don't think Madonna was thinking about Courtney Love at this period of time. But a simpler explanation, you know what makes me sick is Courtney Love wanted to be Madonna. Courtney Love wanted to be Stevie Nicks, right? Courtney Love wanted to be an Alanis Morissette, but she couldn't, so she took this other route where she could just scream and make noise. And thankfully, Billy Corgan and Kurt Cobain came along and took all this nonsense and made it into a couple records for her, right? If anyone in the music industry has never deserved to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's Courtney. And that's why they've never voted for Hole. It doesn't matter how many records Hole sells. The people who vote, the actual committee who says this person changed culture enough, their band was great enough that they're going to go in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they will not put Hole in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And we know why. Because she's not a musician and they know it. Courtney checked her. Watch next year Hole get voted into the R&R Hall of Fame. If so, it'll be because she paid somebody off. Courtney checked herself into a hospital, she says, because I was going to go crazy. I was going to take drugs. I've never been a person to take drugs in a crisis. I usually take drugs when I'm happy. I felt really like kill ing myself, trying to get around that YouTube algorithm. So here's Courtney talking about the S word, saying she's going to do it to herself, right? So I checked myself into a hospital for 2 weeks before the baby was born. That was to detox. That was so she basically what this sounds like to me is she was doing H the whole time. And then she thought if I quit at the last moment, it will not show up once I have the baby. It won't be in the baby. But We do know that Frances Bean did have a hard time in the hospital. I'm not going to talk about it in this video. We know that there was enough evidence for them to take Frances Bean away. What Courtney didn't know is anything you've done during your pregnancy can be tested, well, not only in your hair, but also, what's the word for it? The placenta. Like, they know. They're going to know. If you did anything during your pregnancy, they'll know, and they'll know whether it was a lot or whether it was a little. And it was enough for them to take Frances Bean away. So this chapter's bullshit, but I'll read it for you anyway. Meanwhile, Kurt was detoxing and once again in enormous pain. Unable to eat, he was placed on an IV and got weaker and weaker for a time, then rallied. His rehabilitation was slowed by the fact that he was occasionally given morphine to kill his stomach pain. He saw a battalion of gastrointestinal specialists who took x-rays, upper GIs, lower GIs, CAT scans, etc. He was weak. He was ready to snap. He'd been crying for weeks, says Courtney. It was nothing but crying. All we did was cry. It was horrible. At first, Kurt didn't understand the implications of the Vanity Fair story. It was obviously upsetting, he says, but I was in such a vulnerable state of mind, and my mind was so clouded from getting off of drugs that I would have rather just let it pass for a while. But Courtney was so upset about it. She was about to have a baby. She wasn't in a clouded state of mind at all. Gradually, it dawned on Kurt what the story was doing to his and Courtney's reputation. One day I snapped out of it and I realized how awful it was, he says. It was definitely affecting our livelihood and our image and everything to a real extreme. And since the Vanity Fair piece was based largely on unnamed inside sources, they had to deal with the profound disappointment and paranoia that arose from the fact that some of their most trusted friends and associates had betrayed them. Now, I talk about the inside source in one of the last Nirvana series videos, I think the second to last. It's about the memorial service. I go into detail about who Courtney made Kurt Cobain believe was this inside source to Vanity Fair. Courtney, for whatever reason, got it in her head that it was Susan Silver, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden's manager, and the woman who really discovered Kurt Cobain. She hooked him up with the attorney, Alan Mintz, who shopped their demo around and got the Geffen deal. Like, that's a whole other story. Yes, my favorite inside source, sarcastically, I'll kiss your open sores, appreciate your concern, you're going to stink and burn. They're talking about Susan Silver. Courtney convinced Kurt it was her. It was not. Of course, Courtney was wrong. It was not Susan Silver. My guess would be it was probably somebody like Eric Erlandson, who was jealous. At that point in time, Courtney had been his lover. Kurt had taken her from him. You know, his band's successful, Hole's not. I would almost bet my bottom dollar it was Eric Erlandson who talked to Vanity Fair. We'd already been turned into cartoon characters by then, and it justified everything, all the lies and rumors that have been going around, says Kurt. I just found it amazing that someone could get away with something like that she couldn't go to jail for it, or get busted somehow or sued. Well, you could have sued her, but you guys didn't sue because everything she was saying was real. And that's proven by the fact that the LA Children's Services took Frances Bean away from the mother. I thought we'd be able to sue her, but it's a matter of having the millions of dollars to fight in court with Vanity Fair publisher Condé Nast, who would support her. Now, the different editor now, the one that I talk about in the Jeffrey Epstein video, is a different editor. I just decided, F this. I don't want to be in a band anymore. It just isn't worth it. I want to kill Hirschberg, Kurt says. As soon as I get out of this effing hospital, I'm not gonna read that. First, I'm gonna take her dog, and not gonna read that. He was too weak to do that, so he says he considered hiring a hitman. Jesus. Kurt actually said this stuff. Wow. Then calmed down a bit and thought about asking David Geffen to pull some strings to get Hirschberg fired, or else he'd quit the band. None of this ever happened. You ever notice whenever Courtney has a controversy, all of a sudden Kurt is so stressed out that he wants to quit his band? What does his band and his success have to do with Courtney Love smoking cigarettes at a photo session and telling people she's a drug addict? Right? It's always like he wants to. That had to be so frustrating for his friends and family to see this woman just destroying all aspects of his life, and him wanting to self-destruct in some morbid way to make her feel better. You know, like, when somebody truly loves you if they go out of their way to do anything they can to make you feel better. right? So we know that Kurt loved Courtney for whatever fucking mysterious, strange, oddball reason. He loved Courtney Love. Courtney Love did not love Kurt Cobain. She compounded his problems. She didn't do anything to try to alleviate them. The best thing she could have done is just shut her fucking mouth and stay at home and take care of the baby. That's the best thing she could have done. And she couldn't even do that. She was too busy using his media attention to garner attention for herself. I digress. Kurt still gets scarily angry when the subject of Lynn Hirschberg's story comes up. She'd better hope to God that someday I don't find myself destitute without a wife and a baby, he says, because I'll get revenge on her before I leave this earth. She's going out with me. Okay, and we all know about the phone calls he made to Hirschberg and the other lady who was going to write a book. On the morning of August 18th, 1992, Courtney began to go into labor. She stunned her doctors by picking up her IV and slamming out of the room. She marched over to Kurt's room, clear across the hospital, and screamed, "You get out of this bed and you come down now. You are not leaving me to do this by myself." She came back to find that the hospital security force had gone apeshit. Kurt was still groggy from a dose of sleeping pills and in extreme pain, but managed to get himself down to the delivery room a little later. Well, yeah, he should be there. At 7:48 in the morning, Frances Bean Cobain was born. She weighed 7 pounds, 1 ounce, and according to the Cobains, she was perfectly healthy. Kurt didn't witness his own daughter's birth. He had passed out. "I'm having the baby. It's coming out. He's puking. He's passing out. And I'm holding his hand and rubbing his stomach while the baby's coming out of me," says Courtney. "It was pretty weird," he says, laughing darkly. "I was so effing scared. It was probably a classic case of what the typical father goes through," says Kurt, who was still hooked up to an IV and in the midst of rehab. "I was just so weak and sick and afraid that something was going to happen to Courtney or the baby." A press release from Gold Mountain a few days later aimed to refute all the speculation about Frances. "The infant is in good condition, is feeding well, and growing at the normal rate expected," page turn, "for a newborn." The statement said, adding, "The vicious rumors that Frances was suffering any withdrawals at the time of birth are completely false, and in fact, she has not suffered any discomfort since delivery. If their baby was a boy, they were going to name it Eugene, after Eugene Kelly of the Vaselines. When they found out that they were to have a girl, they thought of Kelly's partner in the Vaselines, Frances McKee. At the time, they weren't thinking of Frances Farmer, the Hollywood actress who was blacklisted and hounded into insanity in the 50s, but Kurt now wishes that were the reason. He adds that the word bean has cropped up in both his and Courtney's lives many times, but mostly they came up with the name after noticing that Frances actually looked like a kidney bean in her early sonograms. So there you go, definitively. Frances, not named after Frances Farmer, but after Frances McKee of the Vaselines. That's another thing we talked about on this channel. Tarnished reputations turn out to be only the beginning of the Vanity Fair controversy. Even Kurt and Courtney's lawyer, Rosemary Carroll, believes that the Vanity Fair article prompted the LA County Department of Children's Services to begin taking action against them. The agency must have seen the Vanity Fair piece. Both Carroll and the Cobains claim it was stapled to the top of the report on them. The story was so well publicized that the agency could not ignore it, even though Courtney had allegedly detoxed almost immediately after learning she was pregnant. Whether anticipating pressure from higher-ups or even public outcry, it's not outside the realm of possibility that the agency was virtually obligated to hassle the rock star couple. No. There are laws, black and white. They could not take Frances Bean simply because of a magazine article. It was because Courtney tested dirty. The baby had dirty. The baby had stuff in it. We know that, okay? You cannot just walk into a hospital and take someone's baby because a magazine said that you were on drugs 8 months earlier. That makes no sense. This is damage control. Michael Azerrad is helping Courtney. Tarnished reputations turned out to be only the beginning of the Vanity Fair controversy. Now, earlier I said that I thought Eric Erlandson may have been the inside source. If you listen to Kurt's words about this period of time, Eric is always there. And he even praises Eric and says Eric was the one person who was always there for us when we were strung out, when we were trying to detox, when we were in rehab. He would come visit us. So who has the most information? And who has the most reason to be jealous? It's often, unfortunately, I've learned this in my life, it is often those closest to you who will be the first to fuck you over. And it usually stems from envy or jealousy. Late in Courtney's pregnancy, Children's Services threatened to relieve Kurt and Courtney of custody of Frances. At a hearing in family court where rules of evidence are relaxed, Children's Services used the Vanity Fair article and what later proved to be a spurious urine test to argue that both Kurt and Courtney were multiple substance abusers and therefore did not deserve to have custody of their child. The judge agreed and ordered Kurt to go to yet another detox center for another 30 days, even though he was completely clean after his stay at Cedars. But that was the least of it. 2 weeks after their daughter was born, Kurt and Courtney were forced to surrender custody of Frances to Courtney's sister, Jamie. For a month after that, Kurt and Courtney were not allowed to be alone with their own daughter. Kurt genuinely believes it was a conspiracy. It was all a total scam, he says. It was an attempt to use us as an example because we stand for everything that goes against the grain of conformist American entertainment. It was a witch hunt. It was an outright Frances Farmer case where we were being mistreated beyond belief. Now, that could have some truth to it. Because they were famous, because they could be made an example of, yes, he could be right. Maybe, perhaps, they were a little harsher on them than they would be on just, a regular Joe Schmo and his wife. But as much as we, are fans of Kurt, you cannot deny the fact that he was strung out and he needed to get off drugs. No one knew this was happening except for a very close inner circle of the Nirvana organization. Given that the couple was fighting for the custody of their own baby and that a magazine article was virtually being used as evidence, their extreme reactions to subsequent bad press start to become more understandable. Courtney still becomes distraught when telling the tale. Toward the end of her account of the Vanity Fair fiasco, this tough, seemingly indomitable woman begins to cry openly. It's one thing to ruin your credibility or to be publicly humiliated, but they took our baby away and there was nothing wrong with her, she says, sobbing. I did not do drugs during my pregnancy. After I knew I was pregnant, I went and got all the help I could get. I went to every doctor in town. I have medical records to prove it, and they just effing tortured us. Well, we also know that Courtney's lying because she continued to take drugs, and 2 more times in Frances Bean's life, custody would be taken away from her mother. She would file a restraining order against her own mother, and eventually she would emancipate herself. And if you don't know what emancipated means, it means she had the money to take care of herself. She was old enough and responsible enough to take care of herself. So the judge made her a legal adult. I think it was around the age of 15 or 16. Frances bought herself a house in West Hollywood. Just a couple houses down, right down the street, she bought Kurt's mom, Wendy, and Kurt's sister, Kim, a house. And Wendy and Kim sort of became her guardians, but at the same time, she was allowed to live on her own, which is not unusual with wealthy children. I think Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone did the same thing, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. His parents were spending all of his money, so he divorced his parents. Just an odd update. As I was looking for a picture of Macaulay Culkin to add to the video, I came across this article. Heartbreak for Macaulay Culkin's estranged dad, who faces the prospect of never seeing his son again after suffering a massive stroke. Hard to tell whether this is true or not. The Daily Mail, I think all publications have lost a lot of credibility. It's weird when people are going and watching podcasts for their news and not actual mainstream media. But this article did just come out 24 hours ago, so maybe Macaulay Culkin will be in the news. It seemed hopeless. Doctors, government agencies, the press, all were against them. At one dark moment, they took out Kurt's handgun and considered taking their own life. Oh my God. Did you just hear this? Courtney told Michael Azarad that they took out Kurt's handgun and considered pulling a double S word. It was just so humiliating. It just felt like so many powerful people were out to get us that it just seemed hopeless, says Kurt. It didn't seem like we'd ever win. It was amazing. We were totally S-word. Sorry I have to say that, but YouTube will literally take the video down if the S-word is used. It's insane. Or at the very least, they'll make it 18 and above, right? which limits people who can actually listen to it. It was just so humiliating. It just felt like so many powerful people were out to get us that it just seemed hopeless. We were totally S-word. It's not the right time for a woman trying to get rid of the hormonal problems of just having a baby, and me just getting off of drugs and just being bombarded with this. It was just too much. But in the end, they put the gun down. I'm going to go ahead and cut the video there. I'm going to upload this half, and then I will continue editing the second half. By tomorrow, I should have that up. So chapter 11 will be out of the way. If you haven't subscribed or ever left me a like, please do so. It helps the channel so much. I will see you soon again with the rest of the chapter. Bye-bye.